Thank you for that introduction. I'm super happy to be here. It is it's great to be part of the wonderful event that SOSV is putting on. And we have an illustrious group of panelists here to suss out some of the details around geothermal. So I want to start by introducing our panelists. We have Kathy Hannun. She's the co-founder of Dandelion Energy, the largest home geothermal company in the US. We also have Carlos Araque. He's the CEO of Quaise, a geothermal energy company developing and commercializing millimeter wave drilling technology for deep geothermal heat access. So now, before we get into what all of that means, I want to start by saying that I didn't know much about geothermal until I started diving into this information for this panel. And I'm excited to say now that I'm a believer in geothermal. I think there's a fair amount of hype. Companies are raising a lot of money. There's a lot of news around it, but I actually think that there probably should be more hype. And so for others who were like me probably a few weeks ago, Carlos, can you start off by sharing what's so unique about geothermal? What makes it so amazing?
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here. I think geothermal is one of the most compelling primary energy sources that are clean, truly global and scalable, and that has the power densities that we need to transition energy in this energy transition. To me, it's about the ability of this source to be local, to be fuel-free, to be waste-free, free of geopolitics. So I cannot think of another energy source that is as compelling as geothermal. True, it's hard, technologically hard, but there's no reason not to be working very, very hard to unlock it.
Kathy, please add on.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add is that it's always there, right? I think that's very unique among renewable energy sources where it doesn't matter if it's a cloudy day or there's no wind or, it's the earth is the earth. And if you find you have access to geothermal heat or power in a certain place, you just will have it and it's extremely reliable. So I think it also serves this very, huge need that we have right now for baseload renewable power.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the idea of it being global, the idea of it being unlimited, those are very sexy, exciting words in the land of clean energy. And what I love about both of you and about this panel really is we're bringing together two founders of companies that are approaching geothermal from opposite sides of the spectrum. And so in any sort of marketplace, right, we need supply, we need demand. And I see Quaise as basically attacking the problem from the supply side, and Dandelion attacking it a bit more from the demand side. So Carlos, I explained what Quaise was. It's probably very technical for everyone to sort of hear what that is. I would love to hear from your perspective and from your words, what is Quaise and how is it solving this problem from that supply side?
Yeah, so when you look at the energy transition from a supply perspective, you realize that the fundamental problem is decarbonizing primary energy supply, which today is mostly fossil fuels. When you look at the alternatives to that, you realize there's nuclear fuels, both the fission and the fusion type, and renewables, which are all very familiar to us, wind, solar, hydroelectric, etc. Quaise is working to really put geothermal supply on the map. Today is very, very small. It's about 0.4% of global energy supply. But geothermal is the most powerful and abundant renewable on Earth, much more so than wind, solar, all nuclear, and all fossil combined. So it's a little bit strange that we're really not trying to unlock the largest source of clean energy. And that's what Quaise is trying to do. Quaise is coming forward with groundbreaking drilling technologies to go a little bit deeper than what's possible with oil and gas in an economical sense, and truly give access to this heat beneath our feet to all of humanity. And we're talking about, anywhere from 3 to 12 miles, depending on where you are. If you can drill that deep and you can do it repeatedly, economically, and at scale, you basically unlock geothermal for all humanity. And it's not just geothermal for simple uses, very important uses like residential heating or industrial heating. It's geothermal to produce electricity and to drive industry. So hotter and deeper combined really change the landscape and the outlook for geothermal. And I like to think that Quaise, once successful, unlocks geothermal supply at the multi-terawatt scale. That basically means that geothermal becomes a key workhorse of the energy transition. Not sub 1%, but upwards of 20, 30, even 50%. It's a true transition into geothermal.
Amazing. And I read that harvesting only 1% of the planet's heat could satisfy the world's energy hunger for 2 million years. Wild. I had no idea.
It's crazy. It's vast. It's vast. I mean, I like to say as well that just the heat that leaks from the earth, whether we're here or not, it's twice as much as the total energy humanity uses today in the 21st century. So it is massive as a resource.
Absolutely. And today, or last year, it was only 0.4% of U.S. electricity generation. You're saying it could be up to 50%. What's the timeline that you give us for Quaise? Because Quaise is a new technology, came out of MIT. Would love to see it online as soon as possible. What's the timing for you all?
So when you talk about that level of supply, you're not talking about one company. You're really talking about an industry. I think what we hope to do with Quaise is to open the door to that industry to basically appear and scale. I think these things take the better part of several decades. Energy transitions are not quick, no matter how much we try, because they involve massive scale-ups of infrastructure, workforce, supply chain. But if we can repower the first power plant, and we'll probably talk about that concept later, by the end of this decade, I think we prove a point that once you extrapolate over time, let's say by 2050, you start seeing geothermal participating at the terawatt level. And that's precisely what needs to happen, is that shift from not having this option to having an option that actually becomes one of the leading solutions to energy transition. So let's give it 20, 30 years. But again, it's not just Quaise. It's an industry that's born out of what Quaise shows that's possible.
Amazing. Yeah. DOE says it's 8.5% by 2050. You heard it here. It's going to be 50% by 2050 when we start this industry. Amazing. So I think that's a really good high level of Quaise. It's a new technology, and it's very exciting. And it again, attacks this problem from the supply side. And then Kathy, you've been working on Dandelion, and this is, as you say, it's a technology that's existed before. It is attacking the problem more from the demand side. Can you tell us more about what Dandelion is and how you think about the approach that you all take?
What Dandelion is doing is allowing homeowners to decide to switch from using fuel oil, propane, natural gas, some sort of fossil heating fuel, which most people in this country use, to geothermal for heating and cooling homes. You can use geothermal to heat and cool any type of building. Dandelion just is starting with homes. We're focused on homes. And we're starting in the Northeast because people in the Northeast need a lot of heating, but also increasingly cooling in the summer. And people have to use a lot of really expensive fuels in the Northeast. So you have millions of homeowners using fuel oil, for example, which is what I used when I grew up in New Hampshire in my house. It's very common, and it's very expensive, and it's very inconvenient. So people using fuel oil are excited to have another option. And we're really trying to follow the solar playbook in the sense that in the same way that solar gives homeowners an opportunity to switch from purchasing the electricity that they don't have much control over from their utility to getting it from the solar panels they install on their roof, we allow homeowners to switch from purchasing the fuels that they don't really have another option in order, to actually having another option and just installing geothermal and being able to harvest 70 to 80% of the energy they're using from the yard, under their yard. And unlike Carlos's technology where you have to drill for miles underground, when you're talking about buildings and residential, we are drilling about 300 to 500 feet. So it's not nothing, but it's much more surface level than Carlos's technology because we don't require temperatures that are that high. So geothermal is the most efficient way to heat and cool buildings. It also is much less expensive than the expensive heating fuels people are using today. So it's one of these opportunities where the economics really align to the environmental benefit. And that's what we see as such a great opportunity.
Amazing. And I think you both do a great job of focusing on the exciting technology, the obvious climate benefits of geothermal, but also the importance of techno-economics, getting the pricing right, and also comparing it to some of the options out there today. And so, Kathy, you already talked about comparison with solar and also how it's cheaper than a lot of the options today, especially in the Northeast. Carlos, you talk about comparing it with fossil fuels and how at terawatt scale it has to be competitive there. Can you both just take us a bit deeper into how you think about both the economics and where you have to be to make this attractive, but also policy, and any policy that you'd want to again, drive this industry forward, policy that exists today that you're excited about, but what you would hope for the future as well?
Yes, I'll start on this one. I think, like most renewable technologies, geothermal tends to be expensive upfront to purchase and install, and then very inexpensive to operate. And it has another property where the ground loops, which are there are these plastic pipes that you're putting in those holes you've drilled 300 to 500 feet deep in the yard. They last basically as long as the home. So it's really a one-time installation of ground loops, and that home will have them for the rest of its useful life. The heat pump that sits inside the home, which is a much less expensive component, kind of like an air conditioner is a good way to think of it, that will last 15 to 20 years. So long lifetime assets, and very, very the least expensive way to heat and cool on an ongoing basis. So one of the things that we've done is, like most renewables, we realized if you offer financing, then you're able to take that upfront cost, which is a little bit higher, and spread it out over the lifetime of the equipment, which is relatively long. And that makes the system very affordable because the operating cost is so low that even when you add on that financing cost, the total cost that the customer, in our case a homeowner, is paying is typically less than what they were already paying before just to buy fuel oil. Not even forget their furnace or air conditioner, just to buy the fuel is more expensive than the total cost each month of buying their geothermal or paying to operate it. So that's the value proposition we've put together. And from a policy standpoint, it's been really important, actually, that we have policy support both from a lot of the electric utilities in the Northeast, but then also the federal government. Some people ask, why are the utilities incentivizing geothermal? And it actually benefits them to a great extent. And the reason for that is a lot of the homeowners that are buying fuels for heating are not buying those fuels from the utilities. Sometimes they are. Some utilities provide both electricity and natural gas, but a lot, just provide electricity. And even the ones that do provide gas, they're not providing fuel oil. So you're taking these customers that are purchasing a fuel often from another company and shifting them onto the utility because the geothermal heat pump runs on electricity. And then not only that, but because geothermal is so efficient and less dependent on the weather outside for its efficiency, unlike an air conditioner, you're reducing summer peak and you're preventing the winter peak you would see with an air source heat pump. So there are significant grid benefits. And what that upfront incentive does is it further decreases the cost upfront for the homeowner to get the system installed. So it just lowers the barrier to entry for customers.
Amazing. And Carlos, from your side?
Yeah, I think many of the same arguments apply at a large or more industrial scale. So when you go deeper and hotter, now you're talking beyond residential heating, you're talking about industrial processes, you're talking about electricity, and you're talking about base load at very large scales. So when we think about what Quaise intends to do with geothermal, we always want to have not only cost parity with fossil fuels, but even with renewables, but firm, right? So when you talk about $30 per megawatt hour or below, we will be there, but firm. And the way you do that is by going, to these temperatures and breaking down two big parts of the cost. The first big part of the cost of going deep is drilling. Drilling is really the big part of the capex. Like Kathy said, these things are very cheap to operate, mostly because there's no fuels. You're just extracting a resource that's there, and it's fast. Drilling is one of them. The other one is building the power plant, to make heat into electrons you need a power plant. And there's 10,000 of them built in the world. That's how most of us get our electricity today. So if you can attack those two, which is precisely where we're focused of our efforts, you can greatly change the outlook for the economics of geothermal while you achieve scale. On the drilling side, that's where one of our key technological breakthroughs come in, the ability to drill with linear costs with depth, not exponentially like it's the case today. And then the ability to leverage existing power plants that are already built. We don't have to build them. It's going to be a big part. So that's what gets you into the sub $30 per megawatt hour. On the regulation side, to me, there is a lot to be gained by treating geothermal development as oil and gas development. It sounds ironic, but oil and gas has done a great job over more than a century to create very agile processes for development. And I think if you treated geothermal like that, you would get 80% of the way there. Now, geothermal doesn't come in one flavor. There's many flavors of geothermal. We're seeing 2 here in this talk, but there's a few more startups doing other flavors of geothermal. And I think they all need their specific regulation because they all represent different risks and different environmental challenges. But I think for our kind of geothermal, if you treated a development like oil and gas, you really just get 80% of the way where you need to be. I think regulation will continue to move in our favor for one reason. It's a mega trend that I see already playing at a global scale, the externalities of the alternatives. Now, there's a big focus on decarbonization, and that's a real focus. We need to do that. We need to reduce the externality of emitting CO2 into the atmosphere by carbon-based sources. But we cannot forget about 2 other very important externalities that have to do with the environment: land use and mineral use. When you look at the alternatives from this lens, how much land per unit of energy, how many metals or materials per unit of energy, and how much CO2 per unit of energy you produce, you start realizing that geothermal comes way ahead of anything else, by far. And when you're talking about 50 terawatts going to 100 by the end of the century, there's really not many other options. I think those externalities will manifest as there's more and more penetration of the alternatives, wind, solar, batteries, and the other renewables. And I think that's going to create significant tailwinds to favor regulation in our direction, in the direction of deep geothermal.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've teased out is, Dandelion was a technology that sort of existed and then through business innovation now is scaling up and making big impact in the building space, which is 20% of emissions, right? And then Carlos, on your side, you're creating this new technology that is meant to compete with oil and gas. And oil and gas is the only industry that over the last 50 years has delivered terawatts of energy every year, right? Like that's the sort of scale that we're looking at. And that's the sort of scale that we should be thinking about when we think about a just energy transition. And I think the points around land use and mineral use is so important and not talked about enough in the climate space today, because they're environmental problems, they're also climate problems, right? Like we can't actually get to the space that we want to be without taking those things into consideration. And so I'm really excited for the technology that both of you have. And I also am curious, what are the biggest barriers to scaling into the future that you all are working toward? Carlos, you can go first.
I'll start, yeah. So what we're trying to do is very capital intensive and time intensive. So to me, one of my biggest preoccupations is always how to capitalize the company, how to create work plans that satisfy investors and create true value and true progress for the company. We can. It's very hard to achieve anything in our space with $1 million or even $10 million. You have to start playing at the $100 million level and $1 billion level. This is what it costs to really get these things developed and deployed at portfolio levels, not just one by one levels. So that's a big one. The other one is it has a very strong technological component, right? So I like to use the analogy of It is not where we are today. Like if you ask me, where are you drilling? Where are you making these big holes? We are not. We're making the machines to go and do that. We validate in the lab. But what matters here is the scalability, the potential for scalability of the technology and what we see in the lab. So being able to tell that story and keep investors engaged for probably a little bit longer time than it would usually take a software company or the other venture capital plays, it's going to be always very important to continue to make progress. We'd like to say that by the end of this decade, we'd like to repower a power plant. And what that usually means is, or what that means is, you go to a coal-fired power plant or a gas-fired power plant, you make a small geothermal field around it, and you feed it geothermal steam instead of steam from the boiler. That, in a brushstroke, decarbonizes the power plant. And you can repeat that 10,000 times over. Now, how do you do that quickly enough so that it matters? You actually leverage the oil and gas industry. So I don't think of them as competitors. I come from that industry myself. I think of them as the ready-made workforce, supply chain, and regulatory framework at a global scale to actually push this into the world at the scale that's required, right?
Yeah, incredibly well said. If there's any reason to sort of forgive that industry, it's just because they can be incredibly helpful to our future. So it's a very practical perspective there. Excellent. And then Kathy, on your side, what's the barrier to scale?
I think for any product that needs to be retrofit into homes that already are built, the number one theme is simplifying complexity, right? The reason it's hard to advance our building stock and sort of change all of the buildings that already exist is that they're all slightly different. And there's a lot of complexity to manage. And so a lot of our focus is how do we make geothermal as simple to get into all those homes as it is to install a furnace or an air conditioner? Because we need to do that in order to scale up, right? You need to have hundreds of thousands of people who know how to install and service these systems across the US and the world. You need to... Complexity has a cost, so the simplification effort is critical to bringing down the cost, and that's a lot of our focus.
Excellent. I'm going to ask the last question for entrepreneurs, for people trying to get into this space. I think it's incredibly exciting, and I think we're all, here to be helpful if we can. I'll speak on your behalf, but definitely on mine and potentially yours. What other geothermal problems are you itching for people to solve? Whether it is by scaling an existing technology, whether it's problems that need to be solved through research and new technology. What should entrepreneurs be looking at in this space? Carlos, go ahead.
Yeah, so imaging, seeing the subsurface is important, right? If you're going to spend 10, 20, 30, $50 million going down into the subsurface, you better have as much information as possible. So anything that contributes in that space, and it is not the same as oil and gas, it's going to be very helpful. Electronics, high temperature electronics always make everything better. We're talking about 300, 400, 500 degrees Celsius. That's much higher than what we can do today commercially. So those are going to be huge enabling technologies. And the rest, more generally, as an entrepreneur, I think the energy transition is an unsolved problem. So don't for a second think that it's just a matter of scaling what we have. There's plenty of space for innovation on the supply, carriers, and demand side to participate and make a difference. It is the greatest challenge of many, many generations, not just ours, and it is ripe for innovation. It needs innovation. So jump in, do it. We need all human capital on this problem.
Kathy, bring us home.
Well, my focus is really renewable heating and cooling, and we happen to use geothermal as the tool to get there for now. But I think, anything that can make it easier and simpler to weatherize homes, to insulate them, to fix the ductwork and the electrical systems, as Carlos said, to see underground, to just have a record of where the utilities are, for example, even very seemingly pedestrian problems. Like if we could make it easier to permit, it would just change both of our industries, Carlos and I. Like just getting permits, either for doing things in a home or for having geothermal on the industrial scale, it's such a big barrier. So I think I would encourage entrepreneurs not to just look at, the central core technology, but also, there's a lot of enabling technologies or products or businesses around permitting, licensing, transmission, right? Carlos, there's just a lot of things in the ecosystem that need to happen to enable scale.
Amazing. Consider this your personal invite to get involved in, if not geothermal, at least climate. Thank you, SOSV. Amazing event. Thank you, Kathy and Carlos. I thought you explained everything incredibly well. And mostly just thanks for doing the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.